Hello everybody, thank you so much. I think that I would like to start with a question which is at the very heart of the background for this conference, I guess. And the question is, why should we care about endangered languages? Is there any reason for the taxpayer to pay a lot of money, which is needed if we go this way, for language reclamation, especially in the case of sleeping beauties or dead languages? Aboriginal people in Australia do not like to use the word dead. So when I talk to Aboriginal people, I would never use the word dead. I use sleeping beauty. But then sleeping beauty has the disadvantage that some people say, oh, you'll just kiss it and it will suddenly be living again. So it has this illusion that, sleeping beauty is easy to revive. And I guess this is a very important question. And Lopran, if I follow Professor Bilash, which means white, like Belarus and the Baltic Sea, and Lopran might say, wait a second, why do we need all these languages? We will speak just one language, there will be peace in the world, there will be no wars, right? No, we will need no soldiers, everybody speaks the same language, so why? I mean, Lopran might be a very kind of, not an evil person, but he could have been a very, a person who believes that for world pax, for world peace, apropos lingua pax, we need to have one language. Now, this is my answer. The Rwandan genocide, which unfortunately killed almost 1 million people, was it 20 years ago, was conducted by two tribes, the Hutus and the Tutsis. As it happens, they speak not only the same language, but the same dialect, the very same language, and they killed each other like animals. So this would be a first answer to Lopran. But then I think that as linguists and as public intellectuals, or as people who go to the communities, as some people said here beautifully within the conference, we need to actually answer this question very convincingly, because most people in the world, as far as I can see, do not believe in what most people here believe in. So it's a question that we need to learn how to answer, because when I talk to Australians, for example, I can assure you that most Australians believe it is a waste of time to reclaim sleeping beauties. Most Australians believe we should not, as taxpayers, pay for such endeavors that are celebrated in this conference. So we need to answer this very basic question even before we answer the question about networking, which is so important. And I would like to very briefly give you 3 main reasons why we ought to reclaim even dead languages. I will divide them into 3: ethical, aesthetic, and utilitarian. So ethical has to do with the ontological, if you're into philosophy, Professor Katsuragi, so that the ontological view that killed languages ought to be reclaimed, and it doesn't matter whether it's good or bad for society. In other words, I'm talking about the ontological reason. For example, a murderer, say, Pistorius. Oh no, he's not a murderer, sorry. A murderer ought to go to prison, even if he has 20 children and he's a widower and no one will. He ought to go to prison because this is a deontological reason without any benefit. So the first thing is ethical. I'll just quote from 1843. This is a guy called Anthony Forster, an Englishman coming to Adelaide, South Australia, and saying in 1843, this is 171 years ago, the native would be sooner civilized if their language was extinct. This is 171 years ago, an ideology of linguicide, killing, language killing, linguicide. In other words, I can prove to you that many of the languages that are discussed here in this conference were killed through linguicide. So we have an ethical reason why we ought to do it regardless of benefits. So this is first reason why the taxpayer should pay. The other reason is aesthetic. I think that the world is beautiful with diversity. I disagree with people who believe that the world would be aesthetically more pleasing or more peaceful with one language, and we've mentioned Rwanda. I think that we are heading, unfortunately, Homo sapiens sapiens, the one who knows she knows. I mean, we are not only sapiens, we are sapiens sapiens. We know we know. I mean, animals, sorry?
Should be sapere sapiens.
Okay, yes. But for some reason, it is sapiens sapiens, Australicus vulgaris, this is how they call it. But the point is that unlike animals, as far as I can tell, unlike rhinoceros, unlike the Tasmanian devil, we know we know. I've never heard of two cows, for example, who are talking to each other, and there is a new bull coming to the herd, and one says, and the other one says, that's exactly what I wanted to say. I mean, if it happens that you have a cow saying that, then it means she knows she knows. But as far as I know, but maybe I do not know, as far as I know, we are the only animals who know we know, whereas they know, but they do not know they know. This is a very interesting discussion. So aesthetically, I think that the fact that we know, we do not want to arrive just like, I don't know if you've seen this beautiful evolutionary kind of chart in which you have the monkey or the ape, and then, you go kind of up like, you start like that, yeah, and then you go, and then you become a barcode, you become a barcode. This is where we are heading. We are heading towards being a barcode, like this conference has a barcode somewhere, and we are going to send our CV as a barcode in the future, and within 1 second we'll get the position or not, and then they will send a letter within 0. Now we are heading there, and I think that if we reclaim languages, aesthetically will be better. In the 1 minute that I have, I would like to discuss the utilitarian benefits of language reclamation, and this is fascinating. But the first thing is mental health. I think that it ought to be mentioned that language reclamation results in empowered well-being. Now, this is extremely under-researched, I can provide you details from British Columbia, where Lalonde et al. Were looking in 2007 at correlation between language loss and suicide. I would like to propose today, as well as in Okinawa next week, I would like to propose that, yes, language loss means more suicide. Language reclamation means fewer suicides. In other words, we need to provide longitudinal studies, and I invite you to do that because no one has done it, I can assure you. We need to provide evidence, not anecdotal evidence that people that I work with told me that they feel empowered, etc. Yeah, I know 1,000 people like that, but this is not enough. We need to show psychological, psychiatric proofs that language reclamation reduces suicidal ideation, for example. This, I believe, would convince governments to give tax money for language revitalization. Thank you.
I shall not take much of your time, probably.
5 minutes.
Yes, no, it will be less. It will be less than 5 minutes. I'm not going to take so much of your time as the speaker before me, for we have to give the floor to other people who give their reactions. I think there will be many reactions to your ideas. I just want to mention the fact that I was not invited to give a paper, but I made a kind of summary of the things we have been doing in Europe, and there's 2 things which are related to the topic of this conference, namely networking. You can read there that I'm affiliated with the MacArthur Center in the Netherlands, which is organized by the Frisian Academy, where I am working not only on the Frisian language, but all languages of Europe which are minorities. And one of the things we prepare is a kind of regional dossiers, and that is in form of booklets, but you can also find it in the internet. You can find the address on this on the backside of this pamphlet, and this kind of booklets is just to stimulate networking. That means we create the possibility to write about the education of minority languages. And as I said just before, the idea in Europe, also in the European Commission, is that every child should grow up in an environment where he has to speak his mother tongue, which should not be the language of state. It could be a minority language, even with very few speakers. So he should be educated in that language. And as you might know, in Europe we had because of conflicts also between Serbs and Croats, I mentioned it yesterday, the problems of ethnic violence. And I think this idea of multilingualism, that the child has the right to use its own language and grow up in an environment also learning the language of state and an international language is very important. That's the first remark on the networking. And the second one is that we have a network of schools. Schools in Europe where the children are in that situation that they have in their educational system at first the local language, so for instance in Wales it's Welsh, then not only these kind of languages, but also languages like, for instance, Hungarian in Slovakia, where the Hungarian minority in Slovakia has another situation as in Hungary, but it is very much stimulated from Hungary. So the idea that you have these schools in bilingual situations and even in trilingual situations, which we try to stimulate English as the third language, it's very important that teachers have an exchange possibility on their methods of education. And this European model is, I think, important for other parts of the world. I give this brochure around and you can have a look at it and you can read about the work we are doing. My personal interest is not in endangered languages, it's mainly endangered archives, so collect material from archives, and you can read about it in this pamphlet, which you can find somewhere. So may I pass this around and you can have a look at it. Okay, thank you. Who is the next?
Well, I don't know.
Maybe everybody can react to what has been said. Maybe you.
Well, I'm happy to talk, but I'm happy to defer as well.
Time is very limited.
I understand that is limited. Well, I should, a bit of Jikor Shorkai, to start with, since we are in the land of Jikor Shorkai. I am Nicholas Oastler. I have the privilege to be the chairman of the Foundation for Endangered Languages, and many of you I hope to see again later in the coming week at our conference, which is going to be held in Okinawa from the 17th to the 20th of this month, September. I am particularly happy to be here because some of you will know that I spent my early career in Japan, and it feels a bit like a homecoming to be here. And I was particularly glad in that one of the few details about the content of this conference I could find out before I came here and sat down is that it was going to be about networking. And I think, oh sorry, is this not, oh, it's got to be closer, sorry. It's going to be about networking. And I would say that something which distinguishes the kind of conferences that we have had in the Foundation for Endangered Languages is that we do stress the links between different language traditions. Not the fact that they would perhaps have been in contact with each other in the past, but that now, if they talk to each other, they can learn a lot. And so at our conferences, we never allow sessions to be about individual language groups or language families or whatever. We have sessions on different problems, and we hope that people will be looking for problems. And it always turns out that there's somebody looking for a solution in Siberia and another one looking for a solution to a similar problem in New Zealand. and they didn't know about each other before they came to our conference, but they certainly do afterwards. And so I think there's an awful lot of hope in this field from the fact that people do get together on a globalized basis. I mean, some people say that globalization is the root of the language loss. I think, however, we can perhaps turn the enemy's weapons against him or her by using these globalized contacts, which are much easier to bring about nowadays than they ever were in the past. I know I'm not allowed to speak very long, so I'll say virtually nothing more, other than say that what I get out of this activity, and in some ways the most important thing that we have to concentrate on as people, those very exceptional people who aspire to inspire change in this field, is to know the enemy. The enemy has many things that it will say. We now know the name of the enemy, which is low prime. I think we have someone to shake our fist against now. Low prime never enjoys anything more than saying, everyone speaks English, don't they? Yeah. But of course, 2,000 years ago, Low prime was saying, omnes loquuntur latinene. You know, this thing of the dominant language being the only language you know is not a new phenomenon. The fact that my continent of Europe is dominated by Romance languages now is due to the fact that there was no revival for the languages displaced by Latin. And the other thing that the Lopran will whisper to you now, he will whisper to you, don't try to speak the other language because you will be humiliated. After all, I should like to be talking to you in Japanese now, and to an extent I could, but I can't really do it. Not fluently as I can do without thinking. And the fact that I can't do it puts me off even trying. And I think that root is one of the most important reasons why it is so difficult to regenerate languages, even from people who are disposed to do it. It's a failure of nerve, a failure, and you people who are proposing solutions, what immediately comes to mind is the examples we've just seen of Hawaiian, but also the person who invented Lopran as well, in their much smaller way, are finding ways to get round, to subvert this cowardice which stops us from re-inspiring, reviving, from kissing the sleeping beauty, or giving her some more substantial treatment which may be more effective. Thank you. Well, I'll leave it at that.
Hello, I'm Sachiu Fujidura, and well, I understand I'm here because endangered language is not really my expertise yet, and I just sort of embarked my study in Miyako Island, which is Okinawa, south part of Okinawa, and I only been there 4 times, and I only started this research. Therefore, I'm still in really the beginner of the Ryukyu myself. However, my expertise and area is language acquisition. I studied 2 bilingual children for my master's and PhD. If that is a longitudinal study, I would say that I studied my own son for 5 years, from the birth to the 5 years old, and I wrote 2 master theses, and then I followed one Korean boy who arrived in Japan without any Japanese, and he lived in Japan for 5 years, and now Japanese is his second language. So I saw these 2 bilinguals on the first stage, which is the early stage, and another child in the school age. Therefore, I thought I can sort of bring out a couple of issues from my own experience to give you in front of you at this conference, which is, and if we're going to think about, and like today, and I was very stimulated by this Hawaiian school, for example. Well, that is because the language is not stable, as we know. However, we tend to forget when we focus on the system of language, and we tend to forget, and it seems to be so solid enough. So, which means once child acquires language, we tend to forget, and they may be the danger they may sort of lose again. Therefore, think about the language, particularly the language acquisition and language and development between the birth to, particularly, I would say, 9 years old. And they always danger that the language can be transferable as well. But at the same time, we can consider at the same time that if we can give the good input for these children, particularly at home and at the school, in a community, then there is always a good possibility for them to learn the language or local dialects quite naturally. That is something maybe we can consider a little bit more. Because after all, language can be learned by speakers, not by the robots or the computers. Therefore, and when we think about the endangered language, and this is something I would like to say today, is that we can more focus on individual speakers rather than the language itself. So then, and we can consider how we can deliver and appropriate multilingual education, bilingual education, or education suited for each community or each dialects, each endangered languages. Thank you.
Good. First, my name is Xu Feng. I come from Beijing of China, and I feel extremely honored and privileged to attend this kind of conference. And for the whole day's presentation, I have learned a lot, and it's very good opportunity for me to improve my English listening ability and of course my knowledge about endangered languages. Well, today I would like to tag myself as an example because myself is a Manchu nationality, and when I was very young, I can still hear Manchu language talked in my community, but the speakers are very old. So when they passed away, that language, Manchu language, is lost in the history. That's a pity. When I grew up at the age of going to primary school, and I have a choice either to go to Manchu primary school. At that time, there is such kind of school, or go to the Chinese school, that is Mandarin Chinese school. Of course, my parents want me to go to Mandarin Chinese school because all the tests will be made in Mandarin Chinese. So if I will go to Mandarin school, I will lose a lot of chance for the higher education, or maybe in the future I will lose the opportunity to go to the better college. So, and then just follow my parents' opinion. So it's a pity for me, for my generation, that we cannot understand and also we cannot speak Manchu language. But in my hometown, there are still a lot of life customs. For example, wedding ceremonies and funeral ceremonies that are typical customers of Manchu nationality. Okay, but I think most of people there in my hometown, they don't care whether they can speak their mother tongue or not. What they care most is about whether they can have a better life. So I never heard they feel pity or anything that they lose the opportunity or ability to speak their mother tongue. So they do not have this kind of awareness to preserve or maintain their mother tongue. So now, working as a linguist, I know my mother tongue has been distinguished as a dead language or extinct language or endangered language. I feel pity, but I can do nothing to this kind of language. And I know, besides, there are other linguists or people, they are working and studying the writing system of Manchu language in order to do their own research work. But I have doubt whether they would like to pass this kind of language to their younger generation, because the younger generation still face a lot of competitive competition in the world, in this society, because in China, the language policy is to foster the spread of Mandarin. If you can speak beautiful or standardized Mandarin, you will have a lot of chance to improve your lifestyle. So that's the reality. I know there are a lot of theoretical policies about the loss of endangered language and the situation of certain minority languages. But the reality is most people just will forget their mother tongue in order to have a better, or in order to survive in the society. That's a pity, but that's a reality. Thank you.
There are many things that are many important topics that have emerged today. And we've certainly heard many academic perspectives. And I think from the academic perspective, there is still hope for the continuation of revitalization. And part of that is because there are strong and committed academics here and elsewhere who will continue, partly fueled by their own belief and commitment to this endeavor, which is aesthetic as well as ethical and utilitarian. But what I'd like to talk about is what the next step is and whom we're not networking with. And it seems to me that, in a way, we always suffer from talking to the converted. Who are the partners that we need to be working with who are not present, either here or at some of our other conferences? And we know that there is a certain amount of power and there is a certain amount of practicality that guides people to use or to stop using their language. I think probably almost everyone in this room has heard or possesses their own personal story of why someone did not speak a language or did not pass the language on to another generation. And the sadness is for the recipient who did not receive it. But I am often reminded from my father, who's no longer with us, that he did not want to pass his language on because of what he suffered. And he did not want his children to experience that again. And that's what I continue to hear today from many people. So that is a good reason. It's a reason that really hits our heart, and perhaps that is what drives us. But to win political votes, to convince the mainstream public of the value of these endeavors, we have to go, sadly, beyond the heart. And so, who are we not partnering with? Other organizations that deal with language, for example, less commonly taught languages, also face some of the kinds of issues that we face. And I think that we could bond with them. I think that I think there was reference to health and wellness, and to look at people in law as well as in medicine who can recognize, or who might not recognize, but with our assistance could come to recognize that some of the depression that perhaps medical doctors are treating are actually rooted in a linguistic identity, and that if they became more aware, they might be more interested in coming on board. So what I'd like to raise are 2 points then. One is, who are we not working with, and how? And then the more important question is a strategic one. How can we begin to work with other people? I think that is in fact the future of Lingua Pax.
So now we have the comments from all the discussants. So next, we have still 15 or 20 minutes. Shall we open for discussions? Okay, okay. Well, is that Patrick?
Microphone. I think I'll just sit next to Jack because he wants to. Sorry. I would like to talk about the topic of the symposium because it was raised at various points. I do not believe that we have to accept realities as they are. These realities were made. And these realities point at problems. They point at the disempowerment and an unequal distribution of power between communities. If you look down, the trick is very easy. Always go down in history of a speech community. If you say, well, Hawaii doesn't get you a job. Well, Hawaii got you every job you wanted before it was colonized. You know? Okinawan is not good for getting a job. Well, Okinawan was getting every job he wanted before Japan annexed it. So, language endangerment is a good problem because the problem points out at an issue that is much bigger: injustice, unfairness, inequality. And that led to the realities we have today. So we should not say, and that's what, the shifters did. They accepted the reality and said, well, we don't want our children to go through that. And what we're now seeing with revitalists is the opposite. They're saying, no, we want them to speak Hawaiian, get a job, be fine, and be proud about that. And if that is not possible in that environment, we will change that environment. Yeah. That is what language revitalization is about. So if Okinawans want to revitalize their language, they have to make a balance sheet. They don't have to say, well, we are part of Japan, and Japan is a rich country, and we have long life expectancy, and we are well educated, and everybody, loves Japan for that. You have to look at what is negative about it. You lost your language, you lost your culture, you lost your humor, you lost your heroes, you lost your way to look at things, you lost the ability to stir your own course. Other people have done it. So if you want to revitalize language, it's not just run around and speak the language. It's to point out at the environment which is endangered, which has endangered language, and change it. Language endangerment is a good problem, because solving it means solving all these things. And that brings us now to values. These are the values that we want. We want people to make their own choices, to speak their heritage language, to claim their culture and be proud about it, and not be afraid of it or humiliated by it. And in order to do so, reclaiming that has benefits. Being minority is not fun anywhere. Wherever you go, minorities, and that's what Gilad talked about, you will always find, the highest rates of alcoholism, the highest rates of unemployed, the lowest rates of people who go to university. that reality is not a natural fact. Doesn't mean that minorities, are disposed to drink more, or to study less, or to work less. They have been put in a situation where this is the way. So you envision, through values, a better community. And to that end, you employ the language. Now, how do you do that? You cannot wait, and that's also been addressed, you cannot wait until people say, oh yes, of course, Okinawans should study their own course, and wait for the majority to look at it. Because the realities we talk about, it's the majority look, the majority perspective on minorities. You want to look on minorities from a minority perspective. And so you have to talk to like-minded people. That might be boring or not, but you have to start there. And that is the networking aspect, I think. So that is what I would like to contribute to that. Thank you very much.
My name is Jack Halpern. I'm Israeli. I've been here for several decades. And I just wanted to comment a couple of things, because I've talked about diversity. And I'm all for that. I myself know 15 languages, and 11 of them I actually speak. And I thought about it today for the first time, but I think 3 of my languages are endangered. I'm not sure if they're officially endangered. One is Aramaic, one is Ladino, Judeo-Spanish. Is that endangered? Yeah. And my mother tongue is Yiddish. I don't know if anyone of you know about Yiddish. And I hear that it's not endangered, but...
Not in the religious context.
Yeah, not in the religious community, yeah. By the way, I'm the only one, we have a Yiddish club in Japan, I'm the teacher, it's the only place in Japan where we can actually learn Yiddish. What I wanted to say is I'm very much for the mission of this Congress and what you're trying to do. I don't know if I can help in any way. I mean, my profession is lexicography. I make dictionaries for Chinese and Japanese, so it's very different. But if there's any way that I can contribute to the efforts of language revival or something like that, I would be happy to participate in whatever program, etc. For Japan, the only thing I would like to say is about Okinawa, Okinawan, well, if I say dialect, I think someone will be angry at me. So the Okinawan language, I've studied it a bit and I speak it a little bit. And every time I go to Okinawa, I'm very sad to see that most Okinawans are not interested in their own language and not interested in promoting it. And hopefully, maybe this conference in Okinawa that you're going to is going to change that a bit. Thank you.
I guess this person have comments or a question too, as a discussion's opinion or audience questions. And if you have any question,
I would like to say two comments very quickly. Firstly, Jack Halpern is one of the best lexicographers in the world, so we are actually very lucky to have Jack here. Of course, we need people like you in the context of endangered languages. I think that endangered and revitalized languages really need your lexicographic expertise when coming to dictionary making. So, I mean, I think that there are many, many ways that you can assist language reclamation. I mean, this is, and by the way, one of the things that we need to learn about revival of language, it's very different from documentary linguistics. So what I call revivalistics is extremely different from documentary linguistics. So documentary linguistics, when it comes to lexicography, they write dictionaries for linguists, not for communities. When you write a dictionary for language revival, it's extremely different from when you write a dictionary for linguists. For example, you don't use IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet. You don't use Latinisms, passe, nick, because Latinisms are actually very deterring communities, Aboriginal, indigenous communities. What is ergative? I mean, you know. So what we need is people like Jack Halpern. If you know the kanji dictionary with mnemonics, and it's very kind of user-friendly. We need to user-friendlyize our traditional dictionaries. So we need lexicographers who are experts of that. The other point is about another utilitarian benefit, and this is bilingual benefits. Of course, there are many researchers that claim now that there is no benefit in bilingualism, and it will continue and continue and continue. I personally believe my intuition, but of course I can give you maybe 20 experiments about the impact of bilingualism on your brain. In other words, unlike what the Chinese or what the New Zealanders or the Australians thought, unlike the parents who said, oh, you must go to a modern standard Chinese school or an Australian English school because this will take you to the university. Actually, we know it's exactly the opposite. I mean, when you're bilingual, when you're a Hawaii speaker, you're not going to be only Hawaii speaker, you're going to be bilingual. You're going to be native speakers of 2 languages at least. So we know that bilingual people are actually more advanced cognitively. I'll give you one experiment, just one. This is Jacques Miller and his friend in Trieste, Sissa. They took 7-month-old babies, and half of them were monolingually exposed, half of them were bilingually exposed. When I say exposed, I mean 7-month-old babies do not speak, even if they're Jewish. They do not speak this thing. Now, they looked at the screen, and there was a light flashing, and all the babies were looking at the light flashing. Suddenly, there was a light flashing on the other side of the screen. To the great surprise of Miller, all the babies who were bilingually exposed moved to the other light, immediately. All the monolingually exposed babies were stuck with the first light. Now, this, for Miller, proves that if you're bilingual, you are actually more advanced cognitively, regardless of language. In other words, you can do things better than monolinguals, independently of the language speech. I'm not talking about many other cognitive advantages, 4 years of extra when you have Alzheimer's, etc. So what I want to say is that no, you should send your kids to a non-modern standard Chinese / English / whatever school, because these kids are going to do eventually better than the other kids. So in fact, from a cognitive perspective, language revival is actually good for the children. It's not a hurdle, it's an advantage. Thank you.
I'd like to comment about the role of culture, which has been, I think, quite superficially addressed today. I think that in the presentation from our Thai colleague, we heard about one of the steps in that process of addressing culture. When our colleague from Hawaii spoke, she described the importance of the land, of nature, of living off of the land, and how that, if I understood correctly, has grown to become an even more important piece in the curriculum over the years. So culture is something that has not been addressed because it's much easier to talk about linguistics. It's much easier to say verb or word order or phonology, etc. Whereas culture, and when we raise the question of values and beliefs, we're now into a domain that is much more challenging. I think what is important is that we look, and perhaps we, engage in issues of the intercultural communication. And not just the research, there are several bodies of research regarding intercultural communication. There's a kind of American perspective, a British perspective, but I think that we might be able to add a different perspective. So the intercultural is important. Are we learning another language in revitalization only by continuing to think in the dominant society's language and just giving different words? And that's certainly not what we want. And if we can't address the possibility of holding competing beliefs simultaneously and knowing in which context to be able to use them, then I don't think we're going to have made all the cognitive advantages. So I think I'd like to add the notion of culture and the intercultural communication. And beyond, I would also say that the safe topics of culture are song, dance, and costume. Why are they safe? Well, they don't hurt anyone. So we have festivals around the world, and people are always attracted by song, dance, and culture. That's not the hard work. That's not where we really reach a kind of dissonance within society between a different way of seeing the world, and I think that we need to address that.
I'm afraid I have already spent a lot of time, but okay. We have more minutes. Okay, I can take one or two questions, please.
I have a comment that I'd actually like to add to your list. And the addition to your list is knowledge. Because embraced in our languages are the knowledges of our culture. Hawaii specifically, we have one word, one general word for rain. But if you really want to get technical, we have a lot of words for rain. And English couldn't touch it. I have a friend, a Sami friend, and he said they've contributed a lot in the global warming from their knowledge about snow. Because the word itself, you have to go back to the people of that place and the culture, because in that word explains all the sciences and nuances of their knowledge base. And I think that's worth reclaiming and reviving.
Next question.
That's okay.
Other question? Please.
Well, my point is rather similar to the lady. Just one question I have, so it's a small question to the lady from Sufan. I suppose that your name is not Manchu.
Yeah.
Then have you got a Manchu name?
No.
No, yeah, well, that's also.
Chinese thing.
Yeah, because normally when we go to, for example, England, I'm quite often asked what is my English name. Yeah, and yeah, the similar question that actually existing. I mean, not merely the loss of language is quite often also loss of your own name. The more extreme case I find that she experienced. And so, language revitalization, and I quite completely agree with Gerd saying that it would reduce the suicide rate. But I'm just looking at the issue from a completely different side and thinking about any other utilitarian justification. But perhaps it may be that we are quite often interested in preserving bluefin tuna, for example, whales, or endangered species, and elephants. And of course, there is a commercial interest which would like to exploit them. And somehow similar things happen in human beings, so we forget about it. But nevertheless, I think isn't it a good, perhaps for the future, a very long-term future, we don't know what will come out successfully of this human civilization. And we may be having quite good assets for the future in today the sleeping beauties. I mean, certainly Manchu people once conquered not only China but all adjacent areas of the Far East, and certainly nowadays in quite a small minorities. But there may be something. I'm just talking about the genetic diversity, kind of linguistic genetic diversity. That might really be another utilitarian argument.
Dr. Xu, do you have a request? Okay, next question, please.
So this is not a really question, it's a commentary. I don't want to appear as a fifth columnist, maybe as a Chinese, but the danger, I agree totally with what Gillard said, and believe me, I support totally the ideals of this conference. But the idea of ethical, aesthetic, and reclamation, they're wonderful things. They're absolutely positive. But aren't there very negative things as well? And here we come to Lobra. One of the things which hasn't been mentioned is that the last century was the century of empires. And the empire set up the United Nations, which has 6 totally dominant languages in the world, maybe depending on the places where they are. It seems to me with the fall of, for example, the Soviet Union and with the growth of independence of many countries, we come now to a period of tremendous nationalism. And this has wrought absolute havoc on the world in the last 20 years. And it seems to be continuing every day. Now, of course, I'm totally opposed to that. But how can we have encouraged national languages? For example, in the case of Hawaii, would be a good example. I'm all for it, I think it's a wonderful program. But doesn't that create people who are Hawaiians separate from all the others? You can't get into that community. And it seems that Hawaii is just one example of this. If we look at Europe today, Slovakia, Ukraine, for example, recently, Latvia, Estonia. I spent quite a bit of time in the Baltic states, in Latvia, for example. And I was absolutely horrified by the fact that Latvian is back again. I mean, really back. But almost half the people are Russian, and they have no rights at all. And not only that, there is this movement now, where it comes from, I don't know, but of really a virulent, terrible type of nationalism, which we, of course, all oppose. But on the other hand, it seems to go along with what we're supporting. So that's simply a comment. I mean, for me, it's a great dilemma.
Wow, now we're getting to a really exciting topic, and only a few minutes left. Well, again, I think we have to return to the issue of the complexity. And I think that when we look at any people who have a will and have been suppressed, linguistically, for example, for a long period of time, we are bound to get an expression of that suppression. So this is, I would say that in order to understand what was going on in the Soviet Union, we'd have to talk about the Russification policy and what that did, and so on, to, as I think we said earlier, to go back in history. But I think also that if we look historically, don't we often see movements that are a bit like a pendulum, so that the empire building has in fact gone in the other direction, but will find perhaps a kind of a yin-yang balance with time. I wonder if we're not calling for new and different sets of values. And one of them is, there is a desire for people to always be insiders. And that's absolutely impossible. I can't go to another country where I don't have that language and expect to be an insider. And isn't that a little arrogant? And so until we can accept perhaps humility and the fact that to become not the majority, not the dominant, not the constant insider is in itself a kind of lesson. So,
I would like to say that what you're saying is right in the case of Sanskrit, for example. In India today, there are many nationalist political parties using Sanskrit which happens to be the subject of reclamation in India, and they misabuse it for that. However, two things to answer. Firstly, research shows that happy minorities are actually less likely to be terrorists, for example, if I link it to terrorism. And secondly, networking. So as opposed to unhappy minorities. So in other words, if you support minorities, it's actually better for you as the governor or the government. Now, secondly, we are here about networking. I personally believe, you might say it's wishful thinking, that the networking that oppressed minorities are establishing, this networking actually has the potential to be against the trend that you were talking about, the nationalist trend. In other words, what we are doing here is, in fact, anti-nationalist, although it looks as if Hebrew, for example, was very successful because of nationhood. So I do agree that nationhood can facilitate language reclamation. In other words, I do agree that if there is an Aboriginal group that would like to have their own state, that might actually improve the chances to have their great children speaking natively their language. So I do agree, but I think that the networking that we are seeing here is not networking among people who would like to have their own state in their own country, but rather it's more kind of humanitarian, humilitarian, if you want, humility, kind of humble networking that in fact decreases the chances for war. And look, wars, civil wars, were often among people who spoke the very, very same language. So I would be against this idea that says, oh, you know, if we all speak English, we'll be very, you know, all the ISIS would kind of embrace the Americans, etc. No, absolutely not. I don't think so. I think that this is a fallacy to believe that if we have one Esperanto or one language, it will solve all the problems. By the way, many Esperantists support language reclamation, so it's not against each other. It's in fact, I see it as the same part of the same coin. Yes, Nick Osler, who wrote a very important book about empires, so he's an expert of empires.
I didn't want to talk about empires, and nor shall I. But yeah, I did write such a book for whatever its long-term value is. But what I wanted to actually go back to something earlier in my own history, and that is Bertrand Russell. He at one point noted, I think he was talking about the Soviet Union, that you could see certain excesses which were happening in the 1920s and 1930s. And he said you shouldn't be surprised at this because there's no reason that the people who have been oppressed should be more virtuous than their oppressors. That doesn't alter the fact that they have been oppressed. And so, in fact, there are certain rights. To quote a word which Patrick brought up, justice would suggest that certain things need to be done as a matter of ethics. And they will not always have uniformly good effects in the short term. Perhaps we hope that justice in the long run is the best policy, but there will be difficulties, and we can see some of them arising in Eastern Europe at the moment, precisely that area. But as was also just pointed out, I think, by Zuckerman, that the minorities, when they are happy, are less likely to do damage than when they feel that their rightful claims have been satisfied. So I think as long as we are of good courage, and we'll see that there will be difficulties in this process, but it is a necessary and ultimately beneficial righting of wrongs, which comes from the reclamation of people's linguistic heritage.
May
Sorry, I need to end this session.
Just one short comment, if I may.
Sorry. And the next comment is last one.
Because Gilad mentioned about the one language does not solve the world's problems, and about Esperanto. I happen to be an Esperantist, I speak it fluently, and the Esperantists don't believe that Esperanto is the solution to the language problem. They believe that it's an auxiliary language to help communication. And they do promote and they do encourage languages, ethnic languages in revival. And like he said, the Tutus and the Hutsis were killing each other. The Arabs, speaking the same Arabic language, they're killing each other. So one language is not the solution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's already only 3 minutes more remaining. Before closing the whole international this conference, we're going to have closing remarks by John Hart. Thank you.
Thank you for the round table.
Well, I think my role at the end of this long day is liturgical. It's to give thanks. And so it's to give thanks to all of our honoured guests who come from all parts of the world and from the neighbourhood, and students, and also to give thanks that we've been able to achieve, I think, what we've set out to do. And that is to talk in a cordial atmosphere, in a spirit of jouissance, a spirit of looking forward with hope. I'm quite tempted just to make a quick comment about the way the conversation was drifting at the very end, which was about rights and nationalism. And quite near from where we live here in downtown Tokyo, there are neighborhoods with immigrant languages. Immigration and immigrant languages is something we haven't quite touched upon here. And perhaps this is a gleam in the eye rather than a plan. But perhaps we could do something about that in a future Lingua Pax. And I say that because in a few years' time, 1 million people may be coming for the Tokyo Olympics and looking at us very, very closely. You know, we revolt against immigrant languages. We revolt against indigenous language. But we see no contradiction in seeing our sons and daughters go abroad and sending them abroad to look for work. We resent indigenous languages and the work that we might have to do and have to pay for. We revolt against immigrant languages in the street as foreign, and yet see no contradiction in the fact that our own language is foreign. Our own language is an immigrant language. Japanese is an immigrant language, a boat people's language. So to add to Gilard's marvelous list, Kantian rationalism, logic. Let's think through this and think very, very, very logically about the matter. The aims of the conference, as set out, I think brilliantly by Patrick Heinrich, were to ask questions essentially about work, putting us back to work. Work is a human right, and we'll all have to go back to work very soon. But work is a human right, and language is also a human right, and so that's something that needs to be pursued very vigorously. So how do we put people back to work with language? How do we put languages together again in society? What are the obstacles? Where do we speak endangered languages? What strategies have been adopted to increase the network of indigenous languages? I was very struck by a moving comment from a Mon speaker quoted earlier by Prem Sirat in Thailand, and it was something about breaking off from the stem, a fruit that is breaking off. And I therefore thought that I would try and close with a poem about breaking off. And the poem is I started with a haiku, but as with many haiku writers, it breaks down and you just want to write more, and it becomes a tanka. But here it is. The mystery of gravity. Language falls silently from the stem. Then, leaping generations with song, it returns to the tree. Can I thank Gakushuin University for being a wonderful host in this green, quiet oasis in the middle of Tokyo. Can I also thank, on behalf of LinguaPax, the Research Institute for Oriental Cultures, whose director, Yoshihiro Sugita, has spent all day with us solving problems. Can I also thank our very close cooperators, the leader of this event today, Takao Katsuragi, who's done a marvelous job in organizing. He has kept today honest and on time. Can I also thank Naoki Sudo, who's been a support and a witness to us throughout all of our preparations, actually for quite a long time, over a year. So we all... LinguaPax will continue its work, and we hope that next year, perhaps the year after, we'll be back and hope to share more with you. Please check our website for news and events. We hope to see everyone again. Thank you very much.